My daughter called me on a Sunday afternoon. I could hear wind in the background, the kind that means a car window's cracked open on a highway. "Dad," she said, that same rushed, sugar-coated tone she used whenever she'd already made a decision before asking me about it. "We sold the house. We're heading to Florida this week. I meant to tell you sooner. Things just got crazy." I stood in my driveway with a hose in my hand, water running over my shoes, and I didn't say anything for almost 6 seconds. I was doing the math. A house doesn't sell in a week. A house doesn't sell without your father hearing about it from a realtor's sign or a neighbor's text. Not after 34 years of being the man 2 streets over who fixed everyone's gutters for free. I turned the hose off. I said, "Drive safe, sweetheart. Call me when you land." Then I hung up, walked into the garage, and pulled a drop cloth off a safe I hadn't opened since the funeral. Before I get into this, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from tonight. And if you've ever had someone in your own family try to make you feel small in your own home, hit that subscribe button, because tonight's story is for you. I'm Walter Greer. I'm 66 years old, and for 31 years I ran a mid-sized insurance underwriting firm out of a converted warehouse in Dayton, Ohio. I didn't sell policies door to door. I built the risk models. I was the guy who read the fine print nobody else wanted to read, who could look at a stack of numbers and tell you exactly where the fraud was hiding before the fraud even knew it was fraud. I built a life out of catching the things other people missed. And somehow, the biggest blind spot of my entire career turned out to be sitting across from me at Thanksgiving dinner for the last 4 years, calling me Dad and smiling. My daughter's name is Brittany. She's 35. Her husband, Cole, is 38, and he's the kind of man who shakes your hand a little too long and calls you champ before he even knows your name. 8 months ago, the two of them sat in my kitchen, right where Brittany used to do her homework as a girl, and told me they wanted to stay close. They'd just found out a baby was coming, my first grandchild, and Brittany cried real tears, the kind that catch in your throat before they ever reach your eyes, and said the words that still echo in my skull tonight. "We want this baby to grow up knowing his grandpa, Dad, really knowing you. Not just on holidays." Cole nodded along, said their rental in town was falling apart, mold in the walls, foundation cracking, and the landlord wouldn't fix a thing. They needed out. They needed something stable before the baby came. I wrote them a check for $1.8 million. It was the proceeds from selling my underwriting firm 2 years earlier. Money my late wife Carol and I had spent 3 decades building. And I handed it over without blinking because I believed I was buying my grandson a childhood with his grandfather in it. Now Brittany was somewhere on I-75, telling me she forgot to mention they'd sold the house I just funded and were driving to Florida like it was a weekend trip to the lake. The disrespect of it landed somewhere deep in my chest, but I didn't let it show, not even to myself. I am a man who spent 3 decades reading risk reports for a living. When a number doesn't add up, you don't panic. You go find the page where the lie is hiding. I walked into my study, locked the door, the same door I'd had soundproofed years ago when Carol was sick, and I needed quiet to keep working. And I pulled the bookshelf forward on its hidden hinge, the one only Carol and I ever knew about. Behind it sat my safe. Inside, I kept the deed to my commercial properties downtown, the notarized copy of the check I'd written Brittany and Cole, my succession documents for what was left of my consulting work, and the one document I never thought I'd need to think about twice, my durable power of attorney, naming Brittany as the person who could make decisions for me if I ever couldn't make them myself. I spun the dial. I pulled the handle. The door swung open onto an empty shelf. I stood there a long moment, blinking at the dark, empty steel, my hand running across the bare metal like I might find the papers had simply slid behind something. They hadn't. The deed, the succession papers, the power of attorney, all of it, gone. Nobody had that combination but me. Nobody had a key to that inner drawer but me. And then I remembered, 3 weeks back, Cole had come by on a Tuesday afternoon while I was out getting my truck serviced, told my neighbor he was just dropping off some baby gifts, and let himself in with the spare key under the flower pot, a key only family knew about. He'd been alone in this house for almost 2 hours. My phone buzzed in my pocket before I could finish that thought. A text from my bank's fraud department. Security alert. The mailing address on your primary accounts has been changed to a new address in Sarasota, Florida. If you did not authorize this change, contact us immediately. I read it twice, then a third time. just to be sure my eyes weren't tricking me the way Cole and Brittany apparently believed they were. They hadn't just taken my money under a lie about a leaky roof. They were rerouting my entire financial identity to another state, and they were doing it while I still believed I was the man who'd taught them both how to ride a bike, how to read a balance sheet, how to trust their own family. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and started typing. My daughter thought she was dealing with a tired old widower who'd stopped paying attention after Carol passed. She forgot who actually built the numbers she grew up trusting. I thought back over the last 5 months, the way the pieces had been sitting there in plain sight the whole time, dressed up as kindness. It started after I slipped on the porch steps in February and cracked 2 ribs. Brittany insisted on moving back in just for a little while, said Cole could work remote from my guest room. She took over my grocery list. She started managing my pill organizer, said it was easier that way with my ribs healing. And there were the gummies. Small, chewy, orange-flavored things she said were melatonin and magnesium. For your sleep, Dad, you've been so restless since Mom. I trusted her. Why wouldn't I? She was carrying my grandson. The weeks after that are still blurry in a way that scares me to remember. I'd walk into a room and forget what I came for. I'd lose my truck keys 3-4 times a day, tearing through the same drawers I'd already searched. My words would slip sideways mid-sentence at dinner, my tongue thick like it belonged to someone else. I felt like I was watching myself disappear from inside my own skull. And the whole time, Brittany had her phone out. "Oh, Dad, you're just so funny when you're tired." She'd laugh, tilting the camera toward my face while I struggled to finish a sentence. "I'm just sending this to Cole's mom. She worries about you." It wasn't worry. It was evidence. She was building a file. The realization hit me like a car running a red light. I stood up out of my chair, walked straight out to the garage where they'd left 3 black trash bags by the curb the morning they pulled out of the driveway for the last time, and I tore into them with my bare hands. People in a hurry to disappear don't take their own garbage with them. Near the bottom of the second bag, under a crushed pizza box and a stack of junk mail, I found it. A small white box, no pharmacy label, no manufacturer logo, just a string of letters and numbers stamped on the foil backing in plain black ink. 3 pills missing, the exact number she'd been handing me every night for weeks. I went back to my study, opened a secure pharmaceutical reference database I still had access to from my old underwriting days, and typed in the code. It wasn't melatonin. It was a heavily restricted sedative compound, the kind prescribed almost exclusively in locked psychiatric units to manage patients who couldn't be reasoned with. Severe memory loss, slurred speech, disorientation that mimics early-stage dementia almost perfectly. My own daughter had been feeding me a chemical eraser at my own dinner table, and Cole had sat across from me every single night, smiling, asking how my day was, while she did it. They didn't just want my money. They needed me to look incompetent. They needed a paper trail proving I couldn't be trusted to run my own life, because a man who can't think straight can't fight back, and a man who can't fight back can't stop his own daughter from being handed control of everything he ever built. I turned to the second monitor on my desk, the one wired into the security system I'd designed myself back when Carol and I first bought this house, long before either of us trusted a stranger to install our cameras. I logged in to pull the footage from the last 3 nights. The screen froze. A command window opened on top of everything. Red text bleeding down the black background. Wipe initiated. Someone, somewhere, had triggered a remote deletion script the second I tried to access the archive. Cole always was sharp with computers. He used to brag about it at dinner. Said he'd consulted for some startup before they moved here. Never said which one. He thought he'd erased every trace of what they'd done in this house. What he didn't know, what neither of them ever bothered to ask, was that before I built an insurance company, I spent 11 years writing fraud detection software for a regional bank, the kind of code that catches a forged signature before the ink finishes drying. I didn't install some off-the-shelf camera system in this house. I built it from the studs up, with a second, mirrored backup running on a private server I'd buried in the crawl space beneath the sunroom, completely invisible to the home network, completely untouchable by any wipe command sent through the front-facing system. Cole burned down the decoy. He never knew the real vault was under his feet the whole time. I flipped the toggle under my desk, killed the corrupted feed, and switched to the hidden archive. The footage loaded clean, time-stamped, untouched. I scrolled to 2 nights before they left and watched my study door swing open at 1 in the morning. Brittany and Cole slipped inside, moving fast, moving practiced, like they'd rehearsed it. Cole walked straight to the safe without a single moment of hesitation, pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket, and spun the dial like he'd done it a dozen times before. He had. Brittany stood by with a cardboard box, loading folders in with quick, clipped movements. At one point, Cole paused, holding the power of attorney up to the light. "You sure about this?" he asked her quietly. One of attorney didn't even look up from the box. Brittany didn't even look up from the box. She laughed, soft and ugly. "Cole, he's a confused old man who can't find his own truck keys. The pills are already doing the work. By the time he figures out what's happening, we'll have full control of everything, and he'll be tucked away somewhere safe where he can't embarrass himself. Or us." I sat in my study with my hands flat on the desk, listening to my daughter describe locking me away like it was a household chore. They weren't just stealing from me. They were building a legal case to have me declared incompetent and committed, so they could take everything without ever having to ask, without ever having to look me in the eye again. I needed proof I was clean, fast, before they could finish whatever they were filing. I called Dr. Whitfield, my doctor for almost 20 years, told his office I needed an emergency blood panel and a full toxicology screen that same afternoon. His receptionist, a woman who'd known me since my hip replacement, went quiet on the line for a long moment. "Mr. Greer," she finally said, "I'm a little confused. Your daughter called us 3 months ago, said you were relocating to Florida for specialized memory care, had us transfer your entire file down to a clinic in Sarasota. She said you weren't able to manage your own healthcare decisions anymore." I didn't raise my voice. I simply hung up the phone and called a man named Russ Tanner. Russ wasn't the kind of attorney you call for a will. Russ handled the ugly stuff: corporate sabotage, hostile buyouts, the cases nobody wanted their name attached to publicly. He showed up at my door at 1 a.m, fully dressed, fully alert, carrying a leather bag heavy enough to do real damage. I sat him down in my study, handed him the empty pill packaging and a printout of the wipe command timestamp, and walked him through every piece of it without raising my voice once. He listened in total silence, then asked me for the exact date and routing number of the check I'd written for the house renovation that never happened. It took him 11 minutes to find it. A property deed in Sarasota County, a sprawling waterfront home, purchase price $2.1 million, paid in full, in cash, 3 days after my check cleared. Brittany's name wasn't anywhere on it. The deed belonged to a newly formed company called Gulfstream Holdings LLC, and the sole managing member listed on the filing was my daughter. She hadn't even put Cole's name on the house. She'd planned an exit that left him exposed and kept herself protected, which told me something about the architecture of this marriage that made my stomach turn even worse than the theft itself. Russ kept digging, his face hardening as the screen filled with more records. "If they stole a power of attorney," he said, "they're not stopping at one renovation check. That document is a blank check for everything you own across state lines." He pulled my commercial real estate portfolio, the strip malls and office buildings I'd spent 26 years acquiring downtown, and within minutes found it. An $8 million commercial loan, taken out against my buildings, using my forged signature, deposited into a new operating account 2 days earlier. My phone lit up on the desk. Incoming video call. Brittany. I took 3 slow breaths, dimmed the lamp on my desk, let my shoulders sag forward, softened my eyes until they felt glassy and far away, and answered. Might I make in noticing. "Hey, Dad," Brittany said, bright and easy, Cole's face hovering just behind her shoulder. "We're all settled in. Just wanted to check on you." Behind them, a blank beige wall. Nothing that would give away the size of the house their stolen money had bought. "It's just a little rental for now," she added quickly, "while we figure things out down here." She asked if I'd eaten breakfast. She asked, gently, almost sweetly, if I was feeling clear today. She was checking the dosage was still holding. I let my mouth go slack. I let my voice wobble. "I think so, sweetheart," I murmured. "I can't find my checkbook anywhere. I've looked everywhere." My head's just so foggy today. For 1/2 of 1 second, Brittany's eyes cut sideways toward Cole, and something close to triumph flickered across her face before she caught it and smoothed it back into concern. "Don't worry about the bills, Dad," she said, talking to me the way you'd talk to a child. "I've got it all handled." I thanked her. I told her she was such a good girl. Behind my eyes, something cold and exact was taking shape. The moment the call ended, my second phone buzzed. A message from Marcus, A private investigator Russ had on retainer for exactly this kind of work. A single photo, time-stamped 4 minutes earlier. Cole, sitting in the private dining room of a steakhouse in downtown Sarasota, deep in conversation with a man I recognized instantly, the founder of Whitbeck Capital, the firm that had spent 6 years trying to buy out my old underwriting clients out from under me before I retired. My own son-in-law was sitting across the table from the man who'd once tried to destroy the company I'd built, financed entirely by money he'd stolen from me. Russ stayed on Marcus through the night, tracing where the $8 million had landed. By dawn we had it, a shell company called Coastal Risk Partners, registered to Cole as founder and CEO, with a pending acquisition contract for a small regional underwriting firm, a firm that, until 2 years ago, had been one of my biggest competitors and was now apparently about to be funded entirely by the money stolen from me, so Cole could turn around and use it to compete directly against the legacy I'd spent 31 years building before I sold it. There was more. Marcus had quietly gotten into Brittany's personal email, found her passwords hadn't changed since college, and inside her drafts folder sat an unsent message addressed to a family court judge in Sarasota County. The subject line read, "Emergency Guardianship Petition. Walter Greer, incapacitated." Russ slammed his hand flat on my desk, the only time I ever saw him lose his composure in 11 years of knowing him. He wanted the FBI on the phone immediately. I told him no. A fraud charge felt like an insult to what they'd actually done. I didn't want my daughter arrested quietly and quickly with a plea deal 6 months later. I wanted her to watch everything she'd built on my money turn to ash in front of people whose opinion she actually cared about. I told Russ to prep my plane. We flew out before sunrise, off the books, tail number scrubbed from any flight tracker that could lead back to my company. Brittany believed I was sitting in Dayton, drugged and confused, waiting quietly for the courts to come collect me. She had no idea I was 40,000 feet over Georgia, armed with 11 years of fraud detection instincts and a folder full of evidence that would end her marriage and her freedom in the same week. We landed at a private strip outside Sarasota just after dawn. Marcus had a car waiting. We didn't go to the house first. Cole and Brittany were symptoms. I wanted the disease, and the disease had a medical license and a gambling problem we'd already started tracing through Marcus's digging the night before. Dr. Calloway, the Sarasota physician who'd signed off on Brittany's emergency guardianship petition, had a private practice buried under second mortgages and a banking trail that led straight to an offshore account tied to an illegal sportsbook. We found him alone in his office that evening, a glass of bourbon sweating on his desk, 3 fabricated patient files open on his screen describing consultations with me that had never happened. I didn't raise my voice. I set a folder on his desk containing the wire transfer records showing Brittany had paid him $110,000 7 days earlier, routed straight to his bookie. I told him exactly what he was looking at: interstate fraud, falsification of medical records, conspiracy to commit elder abuse, federal crimes that would end with him losing his license and his freedom in the same sentence. I slid a blank affidavit across the desk and told him to start writing. He wept while he signed it. I felt nothing watching him do it. Before I left, he told me one more thing, his voice shaking. Brittany and Cole weren't waiting on the guardianship petition to clear before they made their move. The acquisition deal Cole had been building was closing the next night, at a celebration party, at the house Brittany's stolen money had bought, with half of Sarasota's investment crowd in attendance. I spent that night with Russ mapping out exactly how the $8 million had moved, how it sat in escrow, waiting on final authorization to release to the seller. And then I told him the part he didn't know yet. 2 years ago, when I sold my underwriting firm, I didn't park all the proceeds in standard accounts where a stolen power of attorney could touch them. I moved a significant portion into an offshore trust with a security clause my old fraud prevention instincts insisted on, a clause requiring any withdrawal over a certain threshold to be authorized by a live biometric scan. My retina, my voice, nothing on paper, nothing that could be forged. Cole had no idea. He thought a notarized signature was the only lock on the door. He was about to learn it was a decoy. The next night, we sat in a rented sedan 2 houses down from the waterfront mansion Brittany's stolen money had bought, watching white string lights glow against the dark water behind it, watching valets in black vests park BMWs and Range Rovers along the circular drive. Marcus had a parabolic microphone aimed at the dining room window, pulling every word out of the glass vibrations and feeding it straight into our headsets. I heard Brittany near the front door, laughing with a woman in a sequined dress. "Dad's struggling so much these days," she said, voice soft and tragic. "It's been heartbreaking watching him decline. Cole's really stepped up, taken over so much of the family business." I sat in the dark with my jaw clenched so tight my teeth ached, listening to my own daughter narrate my disappearance to strangers. Inside the dining room, Cole was closing the deal. I heard the rustle of paper, the scratch of a pen, his voice swelling with a confidence that had never once belonged to him. "Consider it done," he told the buyer's representative. "Authorizing the final transfer right now." His fingers tapped the keyboard. He had no idea what was waiting on the other end of that authorization request. I opened my laptop, logged into the trust's secure terminal, and typed a single line into the override field. Trust Revocation Fraud Protocol. I attached the unauthorized withdrawal attempt and the forged power of attorney. I hit send. What happened next took less than 4 seconds. The $8 million didn't just get denied. It got seized and frozen under the trust's automatic fraud lock, and the lock didn't stop there. It compiled the entire transaction record, the forged documents, the originating IP addresses, and fired it directly to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division and the Treasury Department, automatically, with no human hand needed to pull the trigger. I watched through the window as Cole's face changed, the confident grin folding into confusion, then panic, as the transfer bounced back red across his screen. The buyer's lawyer leaned in, his voice sharpening. "Is there a problem with the funds, Cole?" Cole stammered something about a routing delay. The lawyer wasn't buying it. At the same moment, near the staircase, a caterer leaned in close to Brittany and murmured something I couldn't quite catch, even with the microphone, until her face went white and her wineglass slipped from her hand and shattered on the marble floor. Her card had just been declined and flagged for fraud review. That's when the sirens started. I watched the blue and red lights sweep across the water through the windshield, watched federal vehicles flood the circular drive, watched agents in dark vests pour out and move through the crowd with a calm that silenced the entire party in seconds. Guests scattered toward the lawn, drinks abandoned on tray tables. Cole stepped out of the dining room straight into the lead agent's path, still clutching his leather folder, still wearing the confidence of a man who'd never once been told no. "There's clearly some mistake," he said, loud enough for the whole foyer to hear. "I'm the CEO of Coastal Risk Partners. I have full legal authority over my father-in-law's estate." He shoved a folded copy of the forged power of attorney at the agent's chest. The agent didn't even glance at it. "Cole Bennett," he said, "you're under arrest for interstate wire fraud, forgery of legal documents, and conspiracy to commit elder abuse." The cuffs went on before Cole finished processing the sentence. I stepped out of the car. I walked up that driveway in the suit I'd worn to my own retirement dinner, the one I hadn't put on since Carol passed, and the crowd parted around me the way crowds do for a man who clearly belongs somewhere they don't. Brittany saw me first. The wineglass was gone, replaced by both hands pressed over her mouth, her face draining of every bit of color it had carried into that party. I walked straight to the lead agent and handed him Russ's folder. "My name is Walter Greer," I said, loud enough to carry across the silent lawn. "I'm the man whose identity and estate were stolen to fund this party. Everything you need is in that folder, including a notarized confession from the physician who falsified my medical records." "Derek, no. Cole." Cole's mask finally cracked all the way open. He dropped to his knees on the marble in the foyer, cuffed hands trembling, and screamed up at me that it was all Brittany, that she'd found the doctor, that she'd pushed the timeline, that he never wanted it to go this far. Brittany stood frozen by the staircase, staring at her husband sell her out in real time, too stunned to even cry. I looked down at both of them and said the only thing I had left in me. "You forgot to tell me you moved, Brittany. I forgot to tell you I built the security system you tried to wipe." The federal case moved fast once the evidence was that clean. Wire fraud, forgery, conspiracy to commit elder abuse. The charges stacked high enough that no defense attorney in the state could talk it down to something survivable. The house in Sarasota was seized within the week. Coastal Risk Partners dissolved before it ever signed a single client. Both of them are looking at years inside, and there isn't a version of this where either one walks away clean. I want to be honest about something, because I think it matters more than the rest of this story. My grandson is innocent in all of this. He didn't ask to be born into a scheme built on poisoned dinners and forged signatures. and I refused to let him pay for what his parents did. I had Russ set up an ironclad trust in his name, untouchable by either of them, administered entirely outside their reach, releasing funds only for school and medical care as he grows. He'll never go without. He just won't grow up watching his parents spend money they stole from the man who's supposed to love him unconditionally. I flew home a few days later, and when the wheels touched down in Dayton, something in my chest finally loosened for the first time in months. I drove straight to the cemetery before I even went home, stood at Carol's headstone with my hands in my coat pockets, and told her I'd done what I had to do to protect what we built together. I think she'd have done the same thing, faster, probably, and with less patience than I had. Back at the house, I poured 2 fingers of the good scotch I'd been saving, sat in my study under the same lamp where this whole nightmare started, and let myself breathe for the first time in what felt like years. The house was quiet in a way that didn't scare me anymore. No one crushing pills into my dinner. No one filming my confusion for a court file. Just an old man, his scotch, and a silence he'd finally earned back. If there's one thing I want you to take from tonight, it's this. Love your children with everything you have, but never let that love talk you out of paying attention. The people who truly care about you will never need you confused, sedated, or quiet to feel comfortable around you. Trust your gut before you trust a smile. And never, ever, sign away your independence just because someone you raised asked you to. If this story meant something to you tonight, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Have you ever had someone close to you try to convince you that you couldn't trust your own mind? I want to hear your story. Stay sharp out there and take care of each other. Trust is a gift, not a blank check. The people who truly love you will let you stay sharp, not ask you to go quiet. Pay attention to small inconsistencies, keep your own counsel, and never mistake silence for peace. Even after betrayal, there's room for grace. Protect the innocent, forgive yourself for trusting too much, and let your remaining days be yours again, lighter, clearer, and entirely your own. A small note for you. This story was crafted and fictionalized by AI for entertainment purposes, while hoping to share a genuine and positive life lesson along the way.